Bobbi Asher is an avid birdwatcher, and she's traveled the world in pursuit of her passion. She's a board member of several organizations that promote conservation, including the International Crane Foundation and our very own Chicago Audubon Society. And she's a member of the Chicago Mayor's Nature and Wildlife Committee. And she visits elementary school classrooms to talk to students and promote awareness of neighborhood birds as a volunteer for Openlands Birds in My Neighborhood program. And she's also a bird monitor for Thatcher Woods Forest. And so I'm going to hand the baton over to Bobbi. And we're so thankful that you're uh, using your time and expertise to talk to us about some bird ID. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Hall, for being here and joining us. I'm now going to share my screen. And share my sound. Okay, we're good? All right. So welcome to Identifying Birds, and what a great time to be looking at bird identification, because our parks and our forest preserves are full of birds right now. It's a very exciting time to be a birder. So when I start my presentations, I like to give credit to all the people who were very generous and shared their photos with me so I could use them in my presentation. So here are the folks that provided pictures for me for this. And also, if they did not have a picture, then I took the picture off of the Cornell Lab website. And exciting times, it's migration. We are absolutely in the throes of migration right now. And this is something that I pulled off the internet this morning of the Birdcast forecast for tonight's migration. And they are predicting that a lot of birds are going to be on the move tonight. And being in the Chicago area, we're in a great location for migrating birds because of this lake and the lake effect. Birds do not want to fly over water. And so that pushes the birds over on the lake edge. And so our area gets a lot of birds during migration. It's a great location to be a birder. And these birds that we're going to be talking about, the perching birds, they migrate at night. That's when they move, and they're moving north right now, and they do it during the night, especially on nights when there's favorable wind. So that'll help push them north. And when they come down, because about sunrise, they'll start to come down out of the sky, and they look for a place to rest during the day, but also to feed. They need a place to feed. They're very hungry. They've been flying all night long. And so they'll come down and they'll look for the closest thing they can find to the habitat that they need that has the food that will supply them and restore their energy so they can continue to migrate, and also places to rest. They're much like us when we're on a road trip and migrating ourselves at the end of the day of a long driving. When we get off the interstate, that's what we're looking for: food and shelter, right? A place to stay and a good night's dinner. And so when they come down in the morning, that's what they're looking for as well. So what we're going to be doing today, and what the point of this presentation is that instead of focusing on a lot of field marks in terms of how to identify a bird, we're going to instead focus on families. We're going to look for clues, and I'll walk you through how, when you see a bird, what do you look for to identify what family it's in? Because if you can figure out what family that bird is in, then you've got your choices narrowed down, and you can go then to your field guide and just look at that section of the field guide, and then you use the field marks to actually narrow it down into a particular species. But this is all about the clues of how you can narrow them down into different species. So this presentation is not going to be about the intricacies of how do you identify a Swainson's thrush compared to a wood thrush, or how you identify an alder flycatcher instead of a willow flycatcher, what it's going to do is help you know, are you looking at a thrush or are you looking at a flycatcher? That's the idea here. So all these things that you see on the screen are clues to how to do that. And so first of all, we look at size, shape, and posture. And size is tricky. If you're looking at a bird in the distance, it's hard to tell how big it is. Or if you're looking through a pair of binoculars, it also can be a little bit misleading. But if there's another bird in your field of view that has, that you know how big it is, and you can have that to compare it to, that will help. But what's really important is the shape, and we'll be looking a lot at bird shapes, and that's very helpful in terms of identifying families, and also how they posture. Are they sitting upright? Are they vertically postured, or are they horizontally postured? Where on the tree are they perched? It all helps in terms of narrowing it down to the family. Also, bill shape is very important. Noticing the shape of their bills. Flycatchers have a very broad, flat bill because they catch birds while they're flying around. Finches have a very thick, conically shaped bill because they're seed crushers. They need bills that can crack seeds. And Vireos have a rather hooked bill. So that'll be a clue in terms of identifying a Vireo family bird. Color can be a clue right away. If you're looking at a blue bird, you know you're either looking at a blue jay or a indigo bunting or a bluebird. If you're looking at a red bird, it's probably either a cardinal or a tanager. So sometimes color can make it easy. But also there's a lot of brown birds out there, so we'll work on that. Are looking at their breasts. Are their breasts solid color, or are they streaky? Are they drably colored or brightly colored? These are all clues. Songs are really, really helpful in terms of identifying birds. But first of all, just knowing where to look. If you hear a bird singing, obviously it gives you a clue on where to look for it, looking for where the sound is coming from. But if you know the song of the bird, it makes it very easy to identify. You know what you're looking for now when you're looking in that tree or bush or on the ground. So it's helpful in terms of finding it. You know what you're looking for. And sometimes it's the best way to identify it because we will look at some families of birds where it's very difficult to tell the birds apart. They're almost identical, and it's very difficult to identify them visually. But if you're lucky and they sing and you know their songs, that's a great way to identify them. And also, it's also helpful if you're doing a bird count or a bird survey. If you know the song of the bird, you don't really have to find it. You know it's there, you can mark it down and move on. So in that situation, it helps speed things up for you. But if you're on a bird walk, everybody wants to see the bird, so you'll still stop and look and find the bird. So it kind of depends on what your purpose is when you're out. Location and habitat, also very, very important. Looking at the location narrows down your choices. Are you in a marsh? That's a particular family of birds. Oh, are you in a forest? That's another different group of birds. Are you in a grassland? That again is another different group of birds. So just the location will help you narrow it down. And then the habitat. What kind of habitat? How is it foraging? What is its behavior? Is it foraging on the ground? Is it high up in a tree? Is it on a pile of gravel? Is it alongside a stream? All those locations and behaviors will help you, again, narrow it down. Also, their foraging style, again, behavior. Their feeding style. Are they poking around in the leaf litter under brush piles or bushes? Are they eating seeds off of a plant? Are they flying from a perch and then coming back? They fly out, catch a fly, and then come back. Those are the flycatchers. All these things will help. Or are they flying zigzag in an open area? Are they flying in a very zigzag pattern very quickly over water or open space? That's very characteristic of swallows. Are they bobbing their tail? That's that will help you identify some birds. So noticing the behavior, being aware of it is helpful as well. And finally, probability. I remember when I was a beginning birder, I was always trying to look for something unusual, try to find something different and unusual, a special bird. And that's probably not the right way to go about it, because your odds of that probability are low because they're uncommon. So first, think about what's most likely to be in the location where you're at. What kind of bird? What's most likely to be in that location? What's most likely to be in the type of habitat that you're in, and the time of year. Use the range maps in your field guides. If you think you've identified a particular bird, check that range map, because if it's the month of June and that bird doesn't breed in this area, you probably want to start over and look again. So that kind of information is important as well. So I want to provide some resources and some ideas of how to help you learn to identify birds. And there is absolutely no substitute for being out in the field with experienced birders who can help you. That is probably the easiest and most important way to learn birds. So what I've offered here are the websites of birding organizations that are either in the city or the nearby suburbs. And all of these bird clubs do give bird walks in the city of Chicago, and also in the nearby areas, in the forest preserves and other areas. So you might want to take a screenshot of this and keep an eye on their websites. I know COVID has kind of messed up bird walks, but people are starting up again, and bird walks are starting up again. And I really strongly encourage you to get out there and get out in the field with others. And also try, when you pick your bird walks, try to pick different habitats, so you'll get some experience in terms of the different habitats and the types of birds that are in those habitats. Another thing is a great resource is learning bird songs. And if I had one resource I could recommend to you for how to learn bird songs, it would be this CD right up here on top, called Birding by Ear by the Peterson Field Guides. I've noticed online that there now people you can buy used copies of them, and I think they do just an excellent job in terms of a way of learning bird songs. They group bird songs together by similarity, different types. They talk you through mnemonics that will help you remember the songs. They'll also help you point out to you what specifically to listen for in order to be able to use the songs to identify birds. For example, water thrushes. Water thrushes, there's two of them that come through our area, the northern water thrush and the Louisiana water thrush. The two birds look very similar, so one of the ways you can tell them apart is by their song. And they will, in that tape, in the CD, they'll talk you through, how do you listen to that song? One of them emphasizes the beginning of their song, the other one emphasizes the end of their song. And so they will help you learn what to listen for. So I think they're just an excellent educational choice. As you advance, then you probably want to listen to and learn from more birding by ear, but I would start out with this one. And I start listening to these things like in March. I listen to them in my car while I'm driving and remind myself, because some of these birds we just hear once a year during migrations, so it's a great way to learn. So I mentioned silhouettes and shapes, and on this slide I'll say don't try right away to try to guess what these birds are. Just focus on the shapes that you're seeing here, what you notice about these birds, these bird shapes. If we were in a group together, I would ask you what you notice, but that's kind of hard to do on Zoom, so I'll talk through it. And so if you look at this bird here, what do you notice? Besides the forked tail, you'll notice that the wings are extraordinarily long. So very long wing birds as to what family we're talking about. Here, this bird and this bird, look at their heads. You'll notice that they both have crests. And so that's a clue in terms of identifying the birds. This bird here, shape, very rounded breast, very round, especially their breast shape is a very round. And so that's a clue as to a family of birds that we'll be looking at. Also here, where they're located on the ground, is also a clue. This bird, what you might see compared to these other birds, is no neck. They really don't show a neck in the same way that the other birds do. So it looks like its head is right on top of its shoulders. So there's another clue as to type of family that we're looking at. Up here, this bird, look at how it's perched. So looking at birds and seeing if they're perched very vertically or horizontally will help you narrow down into families. And so this bird is perched very upright, very, very vertically. Whereas this bird, you can see, is more horizontally perched. So its posture is very different. Again, looking at bill shapes. Bill shapes are a good clue as to a family of birds. And these two birds here, look at the difference in the shape of their bills. We have this bird here that has a very narrow, pointed bill, very sharp. It's almost tweezer-like. And that's exactly how this bird forages. It picks little insects off of leaves of trees. So that tweezer bill is very important to what they eat, how they catch their food. This bird, with its very conically shaped bill, very strong bill, is a seed crusher. They eat a lot of seeds, and so their bill is shaped accordingly so they can crush the seeds and get the nuts out of them. And finally, this bird, again, the tweezer-like bill. This is an insect eater, but look at its tail, how its tail is postured. That's a very strong clue as to what it is. So here are the answers. To what these are. So this bird here with the incredibly long wings, that's very characteristic of the swallow family. Those long wings tell you that these birds fly constantly, and that's how they feed, that's how they forage. They eat on the wing. Our crested birds, our blue jays and our cardinals, I'm sure are familiar to you. And also the unusual way the cardinal holds its tail. Thrushes. Well, we have a very well-known thrush in our area, the robin, but we'll be talking about other thrushes as well. And that breast shape is what will give you a clue when you're noticing thrushes. Blackbirds, no neck. Very unusual or shape for them, very diagnostic. And our flycatchers, these birds perch very vertically because they're looking out, they're sitting on a perch and they're looking out for insects flying around. So their forage strategy is that they will see an insect, fly out, catch it, and then return back to a perch. And so when you see a bird in a tree fly out and then fly back to another perch again, it's very characteristic behavior of a flycatcher. Sparrows hold themselves more horizontally. They're close to the ground or on the ground usually. And so this more horizontal Posture helps them. Their foraging strategy is that they're feeding they're looking on the ground for insects and seeds. Warblers tend to be up in the trees, but again, they held their bodies more horizontally because they're feeding on insects that are in the tree. So they're looking more closely in the tree for insects. And our finches are the ones with these conical beaks. That's very characteristic of a finch. And finally, the wrens, their tails, how they hold their tails. They make it easy, very easy to identify because of that tail cocking that they do. So what we're going to do is the rest of this presentation I've put in taxonomic order, which means it's in the order of how the birds are listed in a field guide, or how they would be listed on a checklist if you're doing a bird survey or just keeping track of your birds on a checklist. I'm going to be talking about the most common birds that we can find in the Chicago area parks and the forest preserves nearby. And again, we're going to try to focus mostly on families. So if you can identify what family that bird is in, is it a flycatcher versus a warbler, or it will guide you then to a field guide where then you can go on with the field marks that you see and try to narrow down the species. There's also a lot of one-off birds in here that we don't talk about the family because these birds are the only bird in their family that we would find commonly in the Chicago area. So they are also in this presentation. I also, on each slide, will indicate if it is a resident. If it's a resident, it's a bird that lives here year-round. It doesn't migrate. And so these are, if it says resident, these are birds that you will also find on bird walks in the winter around Chicago. If it doesn't say anything, then it's a migrant, which means either you'll just see it during migration. If they breed further north of here, they'll just come through in spring and fall, or they might be a summer breeder and they'll stay here for the summer also to breed. So you'll see them all summer long. So the first bird we're going to look at, because birds of prey are at the beginning of the field guide, is our Cooper's hawk, a common predator in our parks and our forest preserves. This is the bird that predates most of the rest of the birds in this presentation. That's what they hunt for. And it's a beautiful hawk. It lives in the forest. You'll find it in the forest. They're very adapted to flying in between trees very quickly in order to be able to catch the little birds. They have the beautiful rufous breast, and they have a horizontally striped tail, as you can see here. And they tend to have a very flat head. So when you see a hawk, look at its head. If it's flat like this, it looks like it has a dark cap, most likely a Cooper's hawk. So they have a very distinctive call. They kind of sound like they're laughing in a way. So that also will clue you as to where to look for a Cooper's hawk if you hear that. The next bird is a very sweet ruby-throated hummingbird. They should be arriving soon. Maybe some of you have seen them already. I haven't, but they should be arriving soon. So time to get out your hummingbird feeders if you feed them. The male has the ruby throat, and the female has a white throat. This is the difference. They have these incredibly long bills because they feed on nectar and flowers, and they also fly catch. So they will catch little gnats while they're flying. So they can do both, but you'll mostly see them around flowers. Particularly, they like red flowers, where they'll be feeding on the nectar. And they have a very characteristic sound. That's how they got their name, hummingbird. So here's what they sound like. If you hear this, you'll know to look around for one. And our family of birds are the woodpeckers. And these are all woodpeckers that can be seen around Chicago. Some of them are resident and some of them are migrants and just fly through on their way north. Very characteristic of a woodpecker is this posture, this clinging to the side of the trunk of a tree. They're very, very vertical, up and down, and they will prop themselves against the tree with their tail in order to help them move and feed. Their tail feathers are extremely stiff to help them do that. Also, their bill shape is very characteristic, as you can see, because they use that bill to drill into the tree to release insects. So it's very chisel-like. You'll also find them on the larger branches of trees. And their behavior, they're foraging up and down in the bark and trying to find insects that they can dig out of the crevices of the bark of the tree. And we're going to look at some of the resident woodpeckers that we have in our area. The red-bellied woodpecker is pretty common, and it has a striated back and sort of a red mohawk to mark its head. It is a resident, it's here year-round, and it has a very distinct call, which I'll play for you. And here's the smaller downy woodpecker. It's a smaller woodpecker. We have male and a female in this picture. The male has the little red dot on the back of its head, so that marks the male. The female does not have that. And they are resident. They have a very distinct song. I'll play that. And we have another woodpecker in our area. It's much less common, but it is around, a hairy woodpecker. And so the downy is smaller, the hairy is larger, and now where you see them side by side like this, you would think, well, it'd be pretty obvious to tell the difference because of the size difference. But in the field, it's really not quite as easy. Again, if the woodpecker is far away, it's hard to judge the size unless you see them next to each other. It's also difficult looking in a pair of binoculars. It kind of distorts size for birds. So, but there is another way to tell these two birds apart, what you can look at. And if you look here in the picture, look at their bill. And look at the bill, the size or the length of the bill compared to their head. And compare those two sizes. And that will give you a clue as to how to identify between these two species. And here you can see it graphed out. So the hairy woodpecker, its bill is almost as long as its head, whereas the downy woodpecker, it's only about half the size, maybe a little less. So that is a great way to tell the difference between these two birds if you're wondering what you're looking at. So that is our woodpecker species. They cling to the sides of tree trunks or large branches and have a very, very similar foraging strategy for all of them, poking in the bark of the tree looking for bugs. This one, the red-headed woodpecker, less common, but it is around. It's the only woodpecker that's also a flycatcher, so you will see it flying around a little more because they also will flycatch. But they also drill trees as the other woodpeckers do. Flycatchers. So it's an interesting group. They're a little difficult to tell apart, as you can see by these pictures, but there are some that that's where the songs become important. But also, just if you can narrow it down to flycatchers, it's a very important skill in terms of identifying these birds. So looking at the family, what's characteristic about these birds? Their perch, They stand up very upright, very vertical, and their behaviors. Again, these are birds that will fly off of a perch, catch a bug, and fly back. So a bird that's going out and in, flying out, catching something or trying to catch something and come back in. That's a very characteristic behavior of flycatchers. Now, some of them again look alike, so the only way to reliably tell them apart is by their song. So that's a whole subject for a whole nother presentation. But we have a few that we can identify pretty easily. One of the more common ones in our area is the eastern Wood-Pewee. And again, maybe it doesn't look quite so distinctive, but the pewee does us a favor. It sings its name. So if you hear a bird singing pewee, you've got a pewee. So here's what they sound like. Pewee. So they make it easy for us. Another flycatcher who also sings its name is the eastern phoebe. So I will be playing the song for you so you can hear that. So they do sing their name, but another thing that makes phoebes pretty easy to identify is their tail bobbers. They bob their tail. So when you see a flycatcher fly out and fly back to the perch when it lands and bobs its tail very actively, that's another clue that it's a phoebe. And these birds tend to like to nests in like the shelters or outhouses of forest preserves. They like to build their nests under overhangs and eaves. So you might commonly see them by the outhouses and things like that in the forest preserve. But I'll play the song for you and you'll hear that they also sing their name. So that's another way to tell them. And another flycatcher that actually has a distinctive appearance so that you'll be able to identify it pretty easily are the eastern kingbirds. And what you're looking for on these birds is the white tail band. It's very visible, this white band at the end of their tail. So if you see a flycatcher, and also their location, they will tend to be more open areas, almost agricultural, so more on the outskirts. So like here it's shown on a barbed wire fence, or they'll be maybe on a telephone wire or something like that. So if you see a bird perched like that that has that white tail band, there's your kingbird. So those are some characteristics of the flycatchers: that upright posture, very vertical posture, and that foraging behavior of flying out and in, out and in. So our next family of birds are the kingbirds. I'm sorry, are the vireos. And vireos also tend to be very horizontal rather than vertical. They'll be very horizontal. They also tend to hold still. So if you can get on a vireo, you can probably get a good look at it because they tend not to move around a lot. They find insects in trees, so you'll find them most commonly in the interior of a tree. And so hearing them sing is helpful because that'll give you an idea of location of where to look for them. Also in terms of shape, look at the bill. You have a rather hooked bill. So that will be another thing that will help you identify a vireo. And one of the vireos that you might want to learn the song for is the Warbling Vireo. They sing very actively and very loud. So this is a bird that you probably will be able to find and identify, well, at least identify by its song. Finding them is another story because these birds are probably the most drab of all the birds that we're going to be talking about today. There is absolutely no field marks on this bird. No eye ring, eye stripe, wing bar, nothing. No marks on its tail. So that's a clue in and of itself. If you find a bird where you absolutely can't find any field marks, that's the start of a clue that it's a warbling vireo. But it's their song that gives them away. And there is a mnemonic to help you remember this song. So this is either going to sound gross or amusing, depending on your point of view. But the mnemonic to remember their song is it goes like this. If I see you, I will squeeze you, and I will squeeze you till you squirt. I'll say it again. If I see you, and this is the vireo talking to a caterpillar. So it's talking to a caterpillar, and this is what it's singing to the caterpillar. If I see you, I will squeeze you, and I will squeeze you till you squirt. So now listen to the song and you'll understand. So that is one of many hints of mnemonics and how to learn bird songs, but that one's a pretty good one. So again, vireos, horizontal posture, hooked bill. Then they hold still, they're not real super active in the tree. So those are ways to narrow down to the vireo family. Our next is the swallows. And these are birds you identify by shape and by behavior and by location. They have these incredibly long wings, as you see here in their shape. And this also is particularly characteristic of the barn swallow. It has a very forked tail. So we'll look at a barn swallow first. Also, the reddish color on its throat and its chest is also, as it flies around, you will see that. So it's easier to identify when you see swallows flying around. The red color here and that forked tail is very diagnostic of a barn swallow. But other swallows that we have that are common in our area are the tree swallow. And this is a tree swallow. It has a very white chest and a very white throat. It doesn't have the red of the barn swallow, and a blue back. Very pretty in the sunshine. And another bird swallow that's common for us is the northern rough-winged swallow, which is here, and it's a drably colored bird. It's brownish gray, but it has little broader wings than the other sparrows, and they're said that this scallop shaped. So it's the wing shape and the color that will clue you in that you're looking at a northern rough-winged swallow. And so those are they tend to be in an open location because they fly around in a zigzag pattern. They're catching bugs, they eat on the wing, and so they need a wide open space. So they will be flying over open fields or over open water where there's a lot of insects. That's what they need in order to feed. Here's a resident bird that's common in our area. So you probably know the black-capped chickadee. I threw it in. Black cap and a black chin. They're very friendly birds, very inquisitive. They're small birds, so size is going to help you, but also the field marks are very, very distinctive. And they're here all year round. And this is a bird who sings its name, so I'll play its song for you, and you'll understand that it makes it easy to find them because they sing their name. Chickadee dee dee. And here's another bird that is common in our forests. It's a resident bird. It's here year-round, the white-breasted nuthatch. And in this case, it's posture that gives this bird away more than anything else. It has a very narrow beak, as you can see here. But look at how it's perching on a tree. It perches on a tree like a woodpecker. Here it is on the trunk of a tree, or it will also do the same thing on large branches of trees. But if you remember the woodpeckers, they're very vertical. They're head up, tail down. They move up and up the tree very vertically. This bird can perch horizontally. So if you see a smaller bird like this, and it's perched on the side of a tree, on the trunk, and its tail is up and its head is down, by definition, you've got a nuthatch, because it's the only bird that can posture like this, that can perch on the side of the tree in the opposite way of a woodpecker. So just seeing a bird postured like that, you'll know what it's a nuthatch. So that's a very, very nasally of sound of their song. So here we have the wrens, and as you remember we talked about earlier, it's the tail posture that gives these birds away. Very characteristic of the wrens. So when you see a little bird, they're small birds. They have the very narrow tweezer-like beak because they also eat insects, but they're holding up their tail at that angle. All of them, you know you've got a wren. And the house wren is probably the most common. It comes to our forests, and it's a cavity nester. These other birds, these other wrens will also come into our area, but they're very habitat specific. So it's location that's going to help you identify these wrens. We have a sedge wren and we have a marsh wren. So because of their names, that'll give you a clue in terms of location and habitat where you would be looking for a sedge wren or a marsh wren. But let's look at the house wren. They're very, not a lot of markings on them, but very wren-like in terms of how they hold their tail. And they have a very distinctive song that they will sing constantly all day long while they're nesting to declare their territory. So if you ever have a wren nest near your house, it's a mixed blessing. It's very cool to have them there, but boy, they really do sing all day long. Then here it's what it sounds like. And they just keep that up. But they're very cute little birds. Very feisty little birds. This is another bird in our forest. This is a migrant, and they're here now. They've arrived. The blue-gray gnatcatcher, and they're small birds. They tend to be up higher in trees, so location is a clue, and also shape is a clue. And it's because they have an extraordinarily long tail relative to the size of the rest of their body, as you can see here. And their tail also has these white outer feathers. So if you see a small blue-gray bird higher up in the trees with this long tail, that's a clue that it's a blue-gray gnatcatcher. And because they are high in the tree, probably what will happen is you'll hear them first, and that'll give you a clue to look up. And they actually do have a very distinctive sound. It's a very high-pitched, very nasal sound. So if you hear this sound, you'll know to look up and look for a bird that looks like this. So just one note and very high-pitched nasally sound of the gnatcatcher. And this brings us to our thrush family. And we have a thrush, of course, that's very common in the Chicago area. You all know the robins. But these other thrushes are birds of the forest, and they are migrants. And again, look for the thrush shape, that very rounded chest or breast. It's very characteristic of these birds. And location will be a clue. These are birds that are near the ground or on the ground. They stay very low, and that is where they look to feed. Their shape is characteristic, and also their behavior. Thrushes hop. They don't tend to walk or run. They tend to hop across the forest floor. So that's another clue that you're going to be looking, that you're looking at a thrush. Um, the robin, of course, is very easy to ID. But this is another one of the thrushes that you can identify pretty easily on the forest floor as the hermit thrush. The reason for this is that their tail, unlike the other thrushes, the hermit thrush, its tail is a different color than its back. So it's color that you'll be looking for to identify a hermit thrush. And it's the more rufusy colored tail versus the more grayish colored back. And the robin, of course, you all know. I put this in here because we're going to be starting to see these guys soon. The robins have already started their first brood of birds. And so as the summer goes on, we'll see more and more juvenile robins around. So this is what a robin looks like when it's first out of the nest. And you'll see a very, very spotted young bird. And then as time goes on, they get a little more of their adult coloring. They're not quite as splotchy, but they're still a little bit splotchy. So these are the robins that we'll be more commonly seeing later in the season. I would imagine you hear that every morning right now, just about, as they sing very early. And so again, to review the thrushes is to look for that shape of the breast, and that they're low to the ground, and that they're hopping. All the behavior that'll identify a thrush. Another bird that comes here in the summer, and they do nest in our area, are the gray catbirds. And their size, they're a little larger bird. They're sort of a dark gray, very drab, one color, except for the little black cap on the top of their head that you can see in these pictures. And also, if you see them from underneath, you'll notice that they have a rufous colored vent. That part of the bird is called a vent. And so that is what you'd be looking for a catbird. They're not real visible. They tend to hang out inside the bush, inside bushes. They're very skulky, so they'll be inside a bush. But they're very active singers, and so if you know their song, you'll know to look around in the bush and know what you're looking for, the dark gray bird of the catbird. They are mimics. So what mimics do is they copy other birds' songs. So when a catbird sings, it's mimicking the other birds it's hearing around it. But at the end of their song, or some point where during the song, they throw in something that sounds like a meow. And that's how they got their name catbird. So if you hear a bird mimicking, but then it throws in this meow sound, you'll know it's a catbird. So here's what they sound like. Meow. So that sound gives them away that they're a catbird. We also have around us the European starlings. This is not a native bird. It was introduced to North America. I threw this in for purposes of having you see that depending on the time of year, starlings can look quite a bit different. Starlings molt in the fall, and so they have their new feathers throughout the winters. You can see this is a winter picture. And when they grow their new feathers, their feathers all have little white tips. And their wings and their tail also are edged in white. So as time goes by and the year goes on, when we come into summer and into late summer before they molt again, their feathers get worn. And it happens to all birds, but what you see it most visibly on a starling, because all those little white tips get worn off. And so towards mid-late summer, the starlings look more uniformly dark than they will in the winter. So another thing to look for is starlings, because they're big dark birds. You might compare them to grackles. So in the case of a starling, it has a yellow bill and a dark eye. So the characteristic of how to tell these birds from grackles. And another bird that comes through in migration, and they can be around in the winter. They tend to move in big flocks. They're very attracted to trees that have dried up fruit. So crab apples and trees like that would have fruit that's dried and has lasted late into the season and into the winter. They will descend in a large flock on a tree and clean all that fruit off of it. The dead giveaway, they do have a very distinctive look. They're very pretty, as you can see, and they have this dark mask on their eye. But the characteristic thing to look for with the cedar waxwings are their tail, that yellow edge. So if you see smaller birds with the yellow edge on their tail, there's your clue that you're looking at a cedar waxwing. And again, you might be alerted to them more by sound, because they'll tend to be high up in the trees and they have a very, very high-pitched song. So not everybody can hear them, but if you can hear them, I'll play it for you, is also a clue of where to look and what to look for. It's a very, very high-pitched song. So you can hear they're very high pitched. And that brings us to the warbler family. And the warblers are coming through. They're starting to come through right now. These are the gems of migration and what gets birders out into the forests during this time of year. It's such a treat to see these birds come through. They're very special. It's a very special time because they breed very far north in Minnesota and up into Canada in the boreal forest. So they are on their way up there. They come through our area. They're probably here for only several weeks, 2-3 weeks, because they're in a hurry to get up north to their breeding grounds to breed. They're small birds. They're tiny. They are beautiful. If you can get these into your binoculars, as you can see, here's just a few examples of how pretty they are. These birds, when they do perch very horizontally, and they have that tweezer beak, a very narrow, sharp beak, because they are picking insects out of the leaves of trees and out of the leaf buds as they're opening up. There's insect larvae in there, and they're picking that high protein food out of there to fuel their migration. That's how they forage. But they move frantically. So the frustration with warblers is you just about get them into your binoculars and they move. They're very hard to follow because they are constantly moving. They're very frantic. They're feeding very, very quickly. And so they're a challenge, but as you can see in these pictures, they're definitely worth finding. And there's a couple of warblers that are more common and are easier to spot, and I will show these in these slides. The first one is the Yellow-rumped Warbler. It's an early migrant. It comes through early in the spring, and it's a later migrant in the fall. It comes later in the fall. The yellow rump, very obvious. This is a male and a female. The male's got a little more distinctive black markings on its face. The female, they're a little brown, but she has the same markings. She's just a little drabber. So they have this yellow patch here on the side of their breasts, and then the yellow rump makes it very obvious. In the fall, you'll see the juvenile versions because the warblers come back with their juvenile birds in the fall. So this is more of a juvenile yellow-rumped warbler. And another bird, a warbler that does stay in our area, they actually nest in our area, are the American redstarts. Very pretty birds. The black and orange male are very, very striking. And the female, while she's more drab, so the black of the male is more grayish on her, and where the orange on the male becomes yellow on the female. So she still has very pretty markings. And they're very characteristic of how they forage. They flash their tails, they fan their tails out and flash them up. And these markings on the tails as they move quickly startle insects. And that is their foraging strategy. They'll raise their tail and flash, and it startles the bugs. The bugs fly up into the air, and the redstarts can then go and catch the bugs. That's an interesting foraging strategy that they have. Very pretty birds. And another warbler that you may be able to find in the forests is the Ovenbird. And I'll play its song for you because most likely you'll be alerted to it by the song. But I also want to talk about some characteristic markings on this bird because they hang out on the forest floor instead of trees. And so you will see them commonly in the same areas you might see a thrush. And so how would you tell a difference between these and the thrush? So you'll hear that in the forest floor or in the forest. It's very loud. So you'll hear it at a very loud call. And some people think it's sort of it's like teacher, teacher, teacher. A sound. And here's a comparison to thrushes. And so what distinguishes the ovenbird from the thrushes to me, its shape, again, the very round breasts of the thrushes. But this bird's a little plump too. But look at its eye. It just has a more prominent eye. And then, of course, that orange crown. So between the orange crown and a much more prominent eye, that will help you identify the ovenbird versus the thrushes. And two more thrushes that I mentioned earlier, the water thrushes. We have a northern water thrush and a Louisiana water thrush. This is all about location. These birds hang out in the sides of streams and rivers. So moving water, usually smaller streams, or maybe floodles and ponds where it's muddy. That's where you will find a water thrush. So location helps you identify them, and also behavior. These are tail bobbers. So if you see a small bird like this with a streaky breast in the mud alongside a stream and its tail is constantly bobbing up and down, you have found a water thrush. In addition to distinguishing them by their songs, which you can learn, visually, one of the ways that you can tell them apart is their throat. If you look at their chin and their throat, you can see that on here on the northern water thrush, it's very streaky. And when you look here on the Louisiana water thrush, it's clean. It's a clean throat. So if you can get a look at their throats, that's a good way to tell them apart. And another bird that's actually very similar to the warblers in its behavior is the kinglets. These are also birds that feed very frantically. They feed in trees, picking bugs, and they're constantly on the move like the warblers are. Their timing is a little different. They tend to be early migrants. They tend to come through a little earlier than the warblers, although they're still around now and there's warblers around. But they were here earlier before the warblers arrived, and they will come through later in the fall after the warblers generally. And there's two kinglet species, and we can tell the difference here in terms of the eye markings. The golden crowned kinglet has an eye stripe, very distinctive, that will help you tell it apart from the ruby crowned kinglet over here. And the ruby crown is there, but the ruby crown is not always visible. The bird can control whether it wants to show that color or not. So if the bird's not showing the color, the more reliable way to tell these birds apart is the markings around their eyes, that the ruby crown does not have that eye stripe that the golden crown kinglet has. And another very pretty bird that skulks around on the floor of the forest is the towhee, the eastern towhee. The males and females actually are both quite dramatically marked in terms of this beautiful rufous side to their chests. The male is black on the back and the female is brown on her back, but they're dramatically marked. They tend to be a little secretive. And here is what a juvenile looks like that we'll see in the fall when they fledge. And so it's a little drabber, a little tougher to tell, but you'll be seeing it likely near its parents. But the thing that gives the towhees away and make them easy to find is they're very active singers, and they have a very distinctive song that sounds like "Drink your tea." So if you listen for "Drink your tea," you'll be able to identify a towhee. So drink your tea, and that will help you find them. And they're very pretty birds to find. Now we have another family of birds, the sparrows. Sparrows, again, can tend to be low to the ground or at medium height up in a tree. Song sparrows will be higher. Chipping sparrows will hang out at medium height trees. Very careful, but they tend to feed on the ground, so you will find them on the ground too. Horizontal, their posture will help give them away. The very horizontal posture that the sparrows have. And then they're all very streaky. They have streaky backs, so that will help you identify them versus thrushes. And they're also smaller. Size will help as well. So there are a couple of sparrows that you can identify a little easier. One is our chipping sparrow, and they will nest here. They'll stay here all summer. The very rufusy cap of the chipping sparrow is diagnostic, as well as its very clean breast. There's no streaking on the breast of a chipping sparrow. And its song, it kind of named itself in terms of why it's called a chipping sparrow. I'll play the song for you. So that chipping sound will clue you in to look for a chipping sparrow. And here's another one, the song sparrow. One easy way to identify these is that black button on their chest. They're a little larger sparrow, and they have very dramatic facial markings, the very strong stripes. The malar stripe here is very, very vivid. But it's this little black button on their breast that helps you identify a song sparrow. And yes, they sing. And another sparrow, one of my favorites that's coming through right now, are the white-throated sparrows. And if you get these in your binoculars, very characteristic, the white throat, the yellow lores, but that white throat is very obvious. And also you'll know to look for them because they have a beautiful song. And I heard it this morning. They're around. They don't stay here, they breed further north, but during this period of time while they're here and singing, it's so special. So I'll play the song for you. It's very pretty. So that's a song that will be in the city parks, could be in city parks and forest preserves, perhaps in your yard even right now, because they'll feed on the ground. And they look very similar to the white-crowned sparrow. The white-crowned sparrows are also coming through right now. Uh, they have the very similar head markings in terms of those black and white stripes, but the difference is how you can tell the difference. This does not have a white throat. So this is the white-crowned sparrow. It has a gray throat. It doesn't have that bright white throat that the white-throated sparrow does. Also, again, a very clean breast in terms of the sparrow world. They either have streaky breasts or clean breasts. So this is one with the clean breast, but that head marking is very, very apparent. And here's another sparrow that comes to our area, but unlike these other birds, this is a bird that only visits us in the winter. They breed very high up in the Arctic. And so they come down to our area in the winter to spend the winters here, and then they leave and go back up way far north to breed again. They're mostly gone, if not entirely gone now. They need to get back up to their breeding grounds. But they're very cute. They kind of look like they're wearing a tuxedo. They have the dark back and the white bellies. So they kind of look like a tuxedo, and the pink beak. They're very, very cute. They will hang out under bird feeders. They will eat the seeds that the other birds drop off of bird feeders. So if you feed birds, keep an eye on the ground underneath your feeders because it's a very common place to find them. And also the forest floor. So this is a review of reviewing the sparrows. Again, looking for the horizontal posture, the smaller size, except for the junco. The rest of them have very streaky backs. So very characteristic of the sparrow family. Rose-breasted grosbeak, beautiful bird, is a migrant. It will stay and nest here in the summer. The male is very easy to identify. They're larger. They have very, very large beaks, huge beaks. There's the female. Again, that beak size is very diagnostic of a grosbeak. But the male, of course, is so striking. Listen for something that kind of sounds like the robin, but very chatty, a very, very chatty robin. And that is the sound of the grosbeak. And here's a juvenile. You'll see these guys in the fall. So they start to have the markings of an adult bird, but they're splotchy as young birds go. Indigo buntings, also beautiful birds. That blue of the male is a dead giveaway. The female, it doesn't really show up in this picture. She will have a little bit of a blue wash on an otherwise gray bird. So if you see her hanging around close to her mate, you'll be able to identify her by that bluish wash. But very, very beautiful birds of the forest, of the indigo buntings, of that beautiful blue. And again, here's a juvenile indigo bunting. You can see it's very splotchy. It's got the blue, but it's very, very splotchy. So that's something that you might see in the fall or late summer after they fledge. Red-winged blackbirds, I don't think I need to spend much time on this species. You guys, I'm sure, know it. Here's a juvenile red-winged blackbird, the male and then the female. And grackles. If you remember earlier, we talked about the starlings. The starlings have a yellow beak and a dark eye. Well, the grackles are just the opposite. They have a dark beak and a yellow eye. And so that's one thing to keep in mind to tell those two blackish birds apart between the starlings and the grackles, because they are both, a black bird. The grackles, if you see them in the sun, have this beautiful iridescent blue coloring on their heads and necks and the top part of their chests. But These are resident birds. You can see them around our area year-round. And another blackbird. Again, remember blackbirds no neck, so the shape is very characteristic. This is a brown-headed cowbird, and yep, the brown head gives that away. And also, they are nest parasites. They lay their eggs in other birds' nests, and the other birds end up feeding the baby cowbird that hatches in their nest, often to the detriment of their own offspring. And here's a heartbreaking picture of this little common yellow throat working very hard to feed this baby cowbird. Such is the way of nature. But the brown-headed cowbird, and they have a very bubbly song. So that bubbly sound is characteristic of the cowbird's song. Orioles, they're here. I saw my first one today. They're spectacular. So what do you need to know about an oriole? It's black head, beautiful, beautiful, brilliant orange male. They're just spectacular this time of year. So very easy to identify. The female's a little drabber, but still very easy to identify that orange, brilliant orange coloring. They're gorgeous, gorgeous birds. And finally, our last group of birds, or a family of birds, are the finches. And in this case, they tend to posture a little more upright. They sit a little more upright, and they are seed eaters. So they have seed crushing bills. Look at that conical bill, very strong bill, in order to be able to crush the seed and get the nut out. So we have two common species of finches in our area. They are both resident, and one is the house finch. Here's the male, and here's the female. The male has that red wash around his face and his chest, and the female does not, but they're very, very streaky birds. And they start to sing very early. They're among the earlier birds to sing. They can start singing as early as February. So here's their song. And one thing I wanted to point out, again, you probably don't need to be taught how to identify a house sparrow. The black chin, these are not grouped with the other sparrows because these are not native birds. They're their own family. They were introduced into North America. But what I wanted to point out is one of the things where you might get confused is how to identify a female house sparrow compared to a female house finch. And there's one very easy way. Although they are the same size and very similar coloring, the house finch has an incredibly streaky breast, and the female house sparrow has a clean breast. So that's a great way, if you're confused, to tell them apart, the females, the house sparrow versus the house finch. And our other finch is the American goldfinch. And these are both males. And it's time of year that you tell the difference in the appearance of a male goldfinch. Right now, the goldfinches, the males have molted into this beautiful plumage of that bright yellow and the little black cap. They're just gorgeous little birds. But they molt twice a year. So they will molt again in the fall and molt into a much more drab appearance. You will still see some yellow on them, so you know you're looking at a goldfinch, but they have quite different appearance in the winter, and then in the spring they molt again back into their beautiful breeding plumage. So their song has a very familiar cadence, in that potato chip rhythm that it has is helpful in identifying the goldfinch's song. But you'll most likely see them. And again, as I said, they molt, so you will see them in these in-between periods when they're molting in and out of that bright yellow, and then they just have this crazy thing going on of splotchy gray and yellow, and they look pretty messy. But so that's how they look as they're molting back and forth, summer and fall. So that concludes our presentation, and we didn't quite take this deep a dive into how to identify birds, but I hope it helped in terms of getting you to learn some of the families of birds and the common birds in our areas, and hopefully to get out and see some birds in migration. So I will stop sharing my screen and take some questions.
Oh, Bobbi, thank you so much. That was so awesome. All the compliments are coming in. It's so much information. Thank you for letting us keep this as a resource and post it up on our YouTube channel. I'm just gonna go in the order that I saw them, and I'm missing some, I'm sure, as they're rolling in so quickly. But so the first one we had was um, from Lizzie Navarro. Have brown creepers gotten here yet into our area?
Oh, yeah, yeah, they migrate through, so we see them mostly in the spring and the fall. You can sometimes catch them in the winter as well, but mostly it's during migration. And yes, they're earlier migrants and then later migrants in the fall. So yeah, they've mostly moved through the area. There might be a few left, but mostly they come in early.
Um, this one comes from Daniela Herrera. What is the difference between male and female robins?
Oh, not much. Not much. Some people think that maybe you can tell the difference in the robins by the color of their head. That if the male has maybe a darker head than the female, I wouldn't bet my life on it. But you do see the difference in the head colors sometimes, and sometimes it's striking. So but that's about it. Otherwise, they're not very dimorphic.
Um, we had a couple of people that I saw, Peggy Burke and Sarah Brotherton, giving big thanks because their cats were really enjoying the bird songs.
That's great.
Kim was asking if the catbird that comes here, is it the gray catbird?
Yes. Yeah,
And
gray
if
catbird.
there's a difference between male and female starlings.
No.
Ooh. Um, do you have a
Maybe I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. Um, maybe yeah. I have to admit I'm bad because they're an introduced species. I don't spend a lot of time looking at starlings.
aside from starlings, do you have a favorite migratory bird?
Oh gosh, a favorite migratory bird. There's a lot of them. The buntings, the grosbeaks, they're all so incredible. The orioles, that there's those brilliant colors. Um, Red-headed woodpeckers are a little bit migratory. Um, they don't go far away, or they change habitats in the winter. That's one of my favorite birds. Um, I'm on the board of the International Crane Foundation, so talk about migrating birds. I have to to give a shout out to cranes. They're awesome. And then, of course, the warblers. I mean, those are the gems of migration. So to get out there and to see the warblers is just such a treat, especially this time of year. And they're wearing their party clothes. They're breeding their new breeding feathers. So they're wearing their party clothes, and they just look great.
Um, is it true that cedar waxwings like to get drunk?
It can happen. It can happen. Birds that eat the dried up fruit on trees in the fall and into the winter, if that fruit is fermented, which it can happen. So yes, yeah, they will get a little drunk. In fact, I remember one time a whole group of blackbirds descending on a crabapple tree, and afterwards they were all kind of down on the ground and squabbling and and a little tipsy. You could tell that that fruit had fermented, so it can happen.
That's so cool. Um, Ellen Douglas asks, with the ovenbird, is there a generalized term for the markings on the chest?
On the chest, well, it's a little more streaky than compared to the thrushes. When I showed the picture compared to the thrushes, their breasts are a little more spotted versus the more streaking of the ovenbird breast.
And Daniela asks about ovenbirds. Are they smaller than average thrushes?
Uh,
I
yeah,
assume.
yeah, they are smaller. Yeah, so size will be helpful too.
Um, when is the best time to go bird watching?
Well, especially this time of year, well, any time is a good time. Get out there and see birds. Um, they're most active in the very early morning, especially now as again as the migrants come down. The first thing they need to do is eat. You know, they've been flying all night. And even our resident birds, it's been a long time since they've eaten. It's been dark, so they've just been sleeping. And so birds tend to be more active, actively feeding out and about early in the morning. So sunrise, right after sunrise, those first few hours is a great time to bird watch. It's also when they're more likely to be singing, and so they're easier to find because of that. They will get a little more active before dusk. They'll do one last feeding before they go to bed. And so they'll sing a little more in the evening and they'll feed, then they'll be a little more active feeding at dusk as well.
Where was the Baltimore Oriole that you saw?
um, Actually, you just put out your oranges and your grape jelly. So that's a great way to attract orioles to your yard, is to just to put out oranges. They like oranges. You nail an orange to a tree. The orange color will attract them, but if you have the kind of, there are special oriole feeders that will hold oranges and also grape jelly, and they love grape jelly. So the color of the orange will attract them. They will feed on the orange, but if you get that grape jelly out there, you can keep them around a little extra longer because they do love grape jelly.
It looks like a lot of questions did come here at the end. I'm gonna pick three that I really like here. Um, First from Tasha Lawson, where are your favorite places to bird here in this area?
Oh, there's so many. So I'd really encourage you just, again, look for bird walks around your area, but look at those websites that I showed, and get out. By virtue of doing a bird walk, these leaders have picked what they know to be a good area at a particular time of year. So they will, just by going there, you know somebody's done their homework and knows that there's birds around and it'll be a good place to go. Um, I mean, everybody loves Montrose, right? It's a migrant trap. It's sticking out into the lake, so those birds that are migrating up and down the lakeshore because they don't want to go any further because of the water. There's that point of land that sticks out of the water, and so those places are called migrant traps because the migrating birds will tend to hang out there and come down to feed in the morning after they've been migrating. So that's why Montrose is so popular. And it's well known. Everybody knows it's there. So it attracts a lot of people. It attracts as many birders as it attracts birds. But also the vegetation's low, so it brings the birds down to eye level, and that's why it's so fun. So, but they're, depending on the habitat you're looking for, the different birds, I would say keep your eyes open for those bird walks because somebody's picked those places for a reason.
That's awesome advice. Laura Marmesh asks, where do birds sleep?
They sleep in trees. The perching birds will actually, their feet, they can actually lock and hold them, and they'll hold themselves in position. They'll sleep perched inside a tree on a little branch. So it's one place. It depends on the species. Some species that nest in cavities will also have a roost hole where they sleep at night, usually an old woodpecker hole. So birds like nuthatches, chickadees, other birds that are cavity nesters, they also will use roost holes. And so they'll sleep in those little holes at night. Some birds will sleep on the ground if they're ground birds. So it all depends on the species.
Wow. And then I love this question. What field guide would you recommend for a new birder?
I don't know that I would pick one. I think it's an individual choice. You know, go to the library and check several of them out and see what works for you. Um, there's the Peterson guides have a lot of they have arrows in them that'll point to the markings to alert you to field marks. So that's helpful. I would say this, get a bird guide specific to the eastern US. So at least that bird guide will then narrow the birds down to the the common birds of the eastern US. So so do pick one like that. So there's Peterson guides. Ken Kaufman has one that actually has little pictures of birds rather than artwork. So that's, and some people prefer that. So again, it's an individual choice. There's an old golden book field guide of birds. It's a little dated now, but it actually has nice artwork. But I love the descriptions in that book. It's very good at telling you about the behavior and the location of the bird, so you can identify from what you read whether you're in the right location, and is your bird displaying the kind of behavior characteristic of that bird. So that book is very easy to help you identify birds as well. So the National Geographic has real pretty artwork, and of course the Sibley's is sort of the book that as people get more advanced, they will use more readily because of the quality of the artwork there. But as a beginner, it just doesn't have as much information about behavior and habitat as some of these others do. So see what works for you. Everybody has a different favorite.
Bobbi, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I'm sure there's some questions that I haven't gotten to, but everyone is sending so many compliments. This has been amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for coming, and I'm glad that you came to this, and get out. This is the time right now. This migration, as much time as you can to get out, get on bird walks, and enjoy the birds. This is a special time of year, and it's always, even in the winter, to get out and see the birds. It's a good excuse to get outside and be in the woods. So. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Good birding.
Thank you, Bobbi. Thank you, everyone. Check out our website for more events later. Bye-bye.